So for those of you that were part of the risk and uncertainty workshop a couple of weeks ago, you may remember this. We were talking about biases and how they kind of stack up on each other, and that the base level, these are kind of groups to understand this, but the base level of biases were actually perceptual biases, and that's what we're going to zone in on today. It's not, we're not going into it now, but if you were part of that, or if you want to look back at that, there were other sets of biases that sit on top and are affected by this base level of our perception. So the action biases, the things we might like framing effects, or kind of things that we can learn about and get books from Daniel Kahneman, or How to Be Decisive, or Making Decisions, and we can learn to understand that they're there, and we can untrain ourselves or train ourselves differently to address it. And we also then on top had the social biases. So a very clear example would be you're working with National Highways, you will naturally, or the organisation and the people you're working with will naturally be biased towards the benefits of roads, for example. And that's not wrong, it's just being aware of those biases and taking that into account in communication. But we're going to focus on this base level here. And the reason why that's actually quite important is it affects all of us, as we've just seen. We cannot unsee them. So we can't train ourselves out of this. Like, we're all affected by this. And even if we can see it happening, it's so quick to go in through our visual system that we can't kind of unchange that. So that's why this is really powerful to focus on. So does anyone, can anyone give me an example of a priming bias you might know of? Or even what it means? Okay, I'm going to give you a clue. So, if I was to ask you what word...
Did you see the chat?
Oh, sorry, I've missed the chat. Oh, you're on the bananas. Okay. Fantastic. I should have put a banana up here instead. I'm sorry about that, Paul. So yeah, if you see this picture and then you're asked to fill in the blank letter in that word, what would you likely think that word would be?
Yeah, in this one is Ruby soap. Yeah, A.
A, yeah, fantastic. This one, that's brilliant. And then I didn't find a way to cover that image over and replace it. But imagine the top one now disappears and you have a different one.
Yeah, soup. Sorry.
That's meant to be food, by the way, that bottom one. If the top one had disappeared and you were given the same task, would you say soap or would you say something else?
Yeah, I agree with Rizwan. It would be soup.
Yeah. So that's a clear example. It's actually the example. Pictures aren't, but the example is what Daniel Kahneman uses in Thinking Fast and Slow. So I was very lazy. My system one's very much in the fore there. And so the priming being that you see something and you have an association of what you expect. You kind of system one works through all the stuff and you came up with soap or soup based on that. So it's just a little example of that and how, well, we'll come on to the how in the graph a bit later, but we'll go on to the next example. So another aspect of our visual system is that we're drawn to familiar patterns and have expectations of how they work. Would anyone care to venture what their first initial reaction is to this graph?
It's odd that you'd normally expect perhaps the colour to be under the line, not above it, although the key point is the line, which is, it's not drawn, it's perceived as the boundary between the white and the blue.
Yeah.
And could I say, I need to dial off very shortly to go to another meeting. So Rizwan, somebody else is going to have to help you.
I'm so glad you could join the start of this, Paul, and
Yeah.
hopefully the rest will be
Much
useful on a video
appreciated.
catch up at some point.
Okay, yeah, thanks. I look forward to seeing the rest of the video. Thanks.
That's brilliant. Cheers. Rizwan, I mean, others are welcome, but Rizwan, do you want to have a go here? Any other things you spot immediately on this?
Yeah, I mean, it's showing increase, and then there is a like sudden decrease in population. Population growth. So the perception is something is happening, and it could, if you just see this, and if you don't know the more underlying information. So it could
Before
be-
I go, could I just point out that the y-axis is the wrong way up? It's actually going
Thanks,
from 0
Paul.
to 1,000. Yeah,
Oh, sorry, I didn't notice that.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, but me and Rizwan were letting other people point that out.
So yeah, I wasn't expecting this.
Thank you, Paul, for your passing gift there. Anything else you wanted to add, Rizwan, to that?
Yes, I think without looking at the axis, I was just I assumed that it would start from the 0 and it's going up, and it's
I would have to say we didn't train for this beforehand, did we? We didn't talk about this. This is the first. Well, you may have seen this before, but yeah, that's kind of the point of this, and this graph example in particular, is that part of our system 1 is that we kind of know what to expect. And then when we realize that the axis is run the other way, it kind of, well, it does me, maybe it doesn't anyone else, but I think it kind of fuzzes my brain, and I'm just like, oh, hang on, I've got to think now, I've got to really understand. Curiously, I was looking in another book and I saw a different example of this done with, I think it was from the Iraq War or something, and it was done with red and blood to kind of infer the kind of death toll. And it's a recognized kind of pattern and challenge to our visual cues. So the next one, this is that we perceive change in stimuli as proportional to the initial stimuli. So taking the top left square here, where there's 10 dots, and then looking at the one below it, what would you say, what's the key point that you take, just looking at those two left ones? Would you say that the numbers beneath and the dots in the square kind of relate? Can you see a pattern there? Well, not pattern, but can you see that? Can you see that there's obviously more dots in the bottom left than there is the top left?
Yeah. So that might imply the change in time. With the time, there is some, so I don't know the underlying information. Maybe it's
yeah, no, there isn't. I mean, that's very very creative of you, Rizwan, but there isn't really. It's really just dots in a square. I mean, you could add axes to it, but it's really the proportionality part. So taking that concept of the left 2, if you look at the right 2 with 110 at the top, can you really see that there's an extra 20 dots in the bottom right?
No, I can't. If there is no number, I won't be able to tell.
Yeah, and that's really that. I mean, I kind of led you through that. That was a bit cheeky of me, but that's kind of the point of this. It's proportional to the stimuli. So if there's quite a lot of gap, and there's not many dots, and yet you double the dots, you can see that really easily. But proportionally, if you've already got 100, an extra 10 is just pretty much impossible to see. And now for, I think, the final test in this section. Can anyone say anything about those 6 squares in the middle? Does anyone want to say anything about them? Their character, their nature? Do they relate to each other? Go on, Graham, you were going to give a go.
I suspect they're all the same colour, and it's the background that gives you an illusion that the colour is changing.
Yeah.
I should have tried to keep a stern, straight face there, and I couldn't, could I? I gave the game away. And so you guessed, because you may have seen something like this before, and you're absolutely right. I saw it in a book and I thought, I'll try it. And I thought, wow, by gum, it works. So yes, they are indeed exactly the same colour. And you stick a gradient behind it and they perceived to be very different. So the point of this, a bit like the last one as well, is that we perceive colour and other things as relative, not absolute. So this means that we are actually really heavily influenced by the context and what we see around stuff. So that gives us a feel for the key aspects here. And to summarize this, these kind of key biases, we're selective in what we see. and can be primed to be so. We are drawn to familiar patterns. So we see what we know and expect. So the graph, we expected the axes to be in a particular way, and then they weren't, and we were like, And then there's a third one, which we're just going to do a quick example on now. So I'd like you, please, as quickly as possible, to tell me how many 5s there are in this grid. Quickly, fast. How many are there?
7.
Okay, and what was your process for getting to that number, Graham? How did you work that out?
I scanned across them all and counted them up. I've probably done it wrong.
No, it's more the process I'm interested in, as we'll come on to in a minute. So you had to scan
Long-handed, yes. I started at the top left and skimmed across the rows and mentally counted them up.
Brilliant. Okay, great. So next one, again, be ready, because this is going to be speed. You don't know what I'm going to ask you. It's similar, but it's also different. So next one. Quickly, how many 3s are there in this grid of numbers?
Only one? Oh, no, sorry. There are more.
3.
3.
Okay. Now you stumbled there, Rizwan. Tell me why.
Just because it was, I think, red color, but it's more catchy, and the other, they were like not very obvious.
Yeah. And they were different, weren't they? So it was harder. You were like, oh yeah, one. That's, oh no, hang on, there's more.
Yeah.
Confusing. Okay. And so next one, really quickly. Are you ready now? You know what's coming. How many 5s are there?
7.
Graham, you were right. Before. Slightly quicker. What can you tell me about that one? How does it make you feel answering that question compared to the other two?
Yeah, it was quick up to scan, I think. Because they were all like a different color, and then you could see the black. There was no 5 in the black, so it was quite quick to just to count.
B's just too colourful, isn't it? There's too much going on at the same time, whereas A's all the same colour and C's 2 colours basically, isn't it? So it's easier to deal with that smaller amount of information.
Yeah. So you've aligned. Nick, you want to say something?
Well, the trouble is, I never trust the compiler. So when I see, they're trying to use color to influence me, I go, but have they missed something?
Fair point. Just you to add to the detail there, Nick. But no, it is a good point. It's a good point. Always worth
Just
checking.
the way I think.
Yeah. But yeah, you're absolutely spot on. It didn't take a genius to work it out, but yeah, I'm really glad you took an active part in that, and hopefully it makes sense to others. And part of the point of this is the third point of visual biases, which is that memory plays an important role in human cognition. But working memory is extremely limited. What do we mean by that? Well, as you've just summed up brilliantly there, Graham, and also Rizwan, it took you a bit of effort, didn't it? You had to scan. It was a mental exercise working through A. B was just like, forget it. What have you done? Just like confusion. I've got to really sit and work this out now. The colours not just like added and not relevant. It actually like probably makes it worse than A, because it's adding another layer that you've got to work through in order to find it. Whereas C, you're kind of connecting you're putting a couple of layers of base kind of attention grabbers to it, and you've decided what it is. You're kind of encoding something. You've decided in advance what that is that needs to be encoded, and you've thought of a way to encode that.